Hello everyone! In this lesson today we will continue to talk about Rook Endgames and we will talk about extra pawn patterns. We will discuss about the positions in which we have the balanced number of pawns on the king side and stronger side is upper pawn on the queen side. If you missed to see some of my previous Rook Endgame lessons, take a look at information about that in right upper corner. In general, rooks belong behind passed pawns, and as a passed pawn advances, each move forward will restrict the space available to a rook in front of the pawn and increase the space of a rook which is behind the pawn. In the following position, we can see that black's rook is actively placed rook because it is behind the pawn, and that is why black rook has much more favorable position than passively placed white rook, which is in front of white's passed pawn, and this position is drawn. But white will never agree for a draw in this position. White will always try to win because he's a pawn up. Now the question is, what are possible winning plans for white in this position? First plan is to push the pawn to a7 square and then try to approach closer with his king in order to release the rook and try to promote. And the second plan is to leave the pawn on a6 in order to keep a shelter for the king on a7 square. Let's see now what will happen in both cases. First, we will see the plan if the pawn goes straight forward to a7 square. So after a6, black will just keep his king on these safe squares, king g7, king h7, and then a7. And now black still plays king g7 because white's rook must stay on a8 to defend his own pawn. And white king starts to approach him closer. King h7, king e4. Of course, now it would be very bad to win this pawn on f2, because after rook b8 now promotion cannot be stopped and white will win the game. That is why black will continue keeping his king on safe squares and black will wait until white king approaches closer and defends the pawn. At the moment when white plays king b6, now rook is free to go, so there is no any more time for safe moves, but we make check rook b2. After king c6, we just move our rook back to a2 and we still attack the pawn on a7, so the rook from a8 cannot move. King b7, rook b2, king a6, rook a2, king b6, rook b2, king c6, and again rook a2, and obviously there is no progress and white cannot win the game. Now we are going to see an example of the second plan. The plan is when white will keep his pawn on a6 square and keep a7 shelter for his king. So after a6 and king h7, white will not play a7, he will play king f3. And then after king g7, king e4. Now, since the pawn is not yet on a7, there is a time for white to capture the pawn on f2. And after king d5, now there are two different ways how black can play this position. I will show you first the plan in which black will try to win all white pawns on the king side. So he will play rook f3, king c6, rook g3, king b7, rook b3 check, king a7, and now g5, with the idea to get quickly this passed pawn. H takes g5, h takes g5. There was no time for black previously to win white's h file pawn, so this is another way how he will get very quickly a passed pawn. And after rook b8, rook a3 of course, and after king b7, f5. Now black will sacrifice his rook for white's a file pawn, and his pawns will be strong enough to not to lose the game. a7, f4, a8 queen, rook takes a8 of course, rook takes a8, f3. Now, since white king is far away, white must be careful how he plays in order not to lose the game. Correct move is rook a2, and after king f6, king c6, g4, king d6, g3, rook a3, attacking the pawn on f3 square, and after king g5, rook f3, king g4, rook f7, g2, it is obvious now that white is forced to keep draw here. There is no any way to make progress, and this game easily ends as a draw. Let's see now another, maybe even better way for black to play in this position. So instead of playing rook f3 and capturing the pawn on g3 and pushing g5, very interesting move is rook f6, with the idea of cutting the king off the 6th rank. If now white pushes his pawn to a7, black will play rook a6 and all is the same like in the first plan. But if g4, then just rook b6, king c5, rook e6. We don't allow white king to approach closer, because when he plays king b5, we start with checks from the side. Rook e5, king b4, rook e4 check, king b5, rook e5 check again. This is another way how this game can end as a draw. Now we have the same pawn structure, but the opposite position for the rooks. Here white rook is actively placed on a2, while black rook is passively placed on a8. And all what black can do now is to occupy promotion square, preventing the promotion. This is actually very easy win for white. White will just activate his king and try to help the pawn. If black king abandon his pawns on the king side in order to help his rook and oppose to white king, his king side pawns will be very vulnerable. So white simply plays a6. White will try to advance his pawn as much as possible because that will completely restrict black rook from having any moves. Rook a7, king f3, king f6, king e4, king e6, king d4, king d6, and now just easy tempo move with white's rook, because white has as any tempos he needs with his rook, while black is not in that situation. Black has only one move now with his rook, rook a8, and at that moment white can push a7 and leave black rook without any available move. So rook a3, easy tempo, and now black king must choose one side. If he plays king e6, then white easily wins the game with king c5, king b6, so he must play king c6, and white king goes to another side. Now possible move is king b6 or king d7, trying to defend kingside pawns. Let's see now what is going on if king d7. Well, simply king f6, king e6, f4, king f8, rook a5, king e8, g4, king f8, rook a3, another tempo move, king g8, h5. Now g takes h5 must be played, otherwise black will lose the pawn, and now this pawn on h6 becomes a target which white will want to win. So king f8, rook a5, if king e8, simply king g7, winning h6 pawn and promoting h pawn, and if king g8, then simply king e5. Now black's king is far away from the queen side, and white is fast enough to reach b6 square and to easily win the game. Another possible continuation for black in this position beside king d7 and king e8 is to play king b6, but then simply king f6. And now, of course, if rook takes a6, this is terrible for black. All kingside pawns will be immediately lost and white easily wins the game. And if he plays, actually after king f6, king c6, and he waits a little bit more, then king g7, forcing h5, king goes back to f6, and now just plan f4, f5, which will create another weakness on black's king side and win some pawns on the king side. So f4, f5, and it is obvious that both of these pawns now on f and h file are weak. White will win both of them and promote h file pawn. So this is easy win for white. In this position, although white has passively placed rook and black has actively placed rook, white's chances are better than in the previous position. The reason is that b file is closer to the king side than a file. Again, of course, if white pushes the pawn to b7, the game will be deadly drawn. But if white pushes the pawn to b6 and keeping the shelter on b7 square for his king, then he has chances to win this game. The point is that white's path with his king to reach the shelter is one move less. It costs one move less than when the pawn is on a file. Also, later, if white king needs to return to the king side, it will take one move less than if the pawn is on a file. So let it be this position as your homework. You should try to play this position as white and to try to play all the best moves as black and to see what will be the final result of this game. If you want to post any comment about this position or any suggestions how would you play, you can leave the comment below this video on YouTube. This is the last position for this lesson, and this is very interesting position in which we are going to see how sometimes Rook Endgames can transpose into something totally different. So in this position it's white on the move, black is a pawn up. White has this dangerous pawn on c7, but that pawn is pinned to the king. It is very unlikely that white will be able to win this game. But let's see. White starts with rook f3 check. And now black has to be careful where to put the king. If king e7, c8 queen, and white wins the game. So king must go to e8. And now first surprise. Excellent move, rook f7. If king takes that rook, then white promotes. And white again has very good winning chances. So since now there is no pinning anymore and white threatens promotion c8, first move now is rook a8. King g7 now. And there are two possible moves for white, to play rook c8 or to push d3. If d3, rook f8, so white will have enough time to win the rook and easily win both of black's pawns. So he can't play d3, he must play rook c8. And now it is wrong to capture the pawn on d6 with white's king, because then king will be far away from any real threat to make, so that's why king f6 is excellent move. And now again, d3 or rook a8 are moves. If rook a8, look at this, rook e7 check, king f8, and now rook d7 threatening to capture the pawn or to win the game instantly with rook d8. And if rook a6 check, king e5, rook a5, rook d5, great move. c8 is a very big threat. And here just rook d8 and wins the game. Or if king e8 to stop rook d8 threat, then just king e6. And again, if rook c8 now, rook h7, king f8, rook h8, king g7, rook takes d8, d3, rook d8, and of course easy win for white. And if after king e6, rook a6 check, then just rook d6, again threatening c8, and after rook a8, rook b6, threatening rook b8, and it wins the game now. Now black can just resign the game. So after king f6, the only move which will still keep black in the game is d3. Rook e7, king f8, and rook h7. Now, king e8 would be very bad move, because after king e6 there is a checkmate threat, and after king f8 just rook h8, capturing the rook on c8, playing rook d8, and easy win. So the only move here after rook h7 is king g8. Rook d7, d2. At this moment it really looks like that black will survive in this game, because there is no any more checkmating threat. And after rook d8 check, king goes to h7, and it looks like that black promotes and saves the game, but that is just an illusion. White wins this game. Rook takes c8, black promotes, rook h8, excellent move, king h8, and queen promotion. So rook endgame transposed into a queen endgame in which black is a pawn up, but he will anyway lose the game because of bad position of his king. king h7, queen h3 check. And if now queen covers the check, then just queen d7 and queen g7 checkmate. And after queen h3, if king g8 is played, then queen e6 check. And now after king h8, just queen e8 check. In the next move, queen g6 check, and very beautiful checkmate for the end. So in this example, we have seen how Rook Endgame can transpose into this very interesting Queen Endgame. That will be all for this video chess lesson. If you want to see some specific content in my chess lessons, please place the comment below my video on YouTube. Take a look at these suggested videos and don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel.